You know, real,
Oh,
I'll mention it later.
okay, we are on Deuteronomy. I think we're starting on chapter 22, aren't we?
Yes.
And I'm looking here, and I have a break at 12.
Yes.
Yes.
All right. Would someone like to read Deuteronomy chapter 22, verses 1 through 12? Please.
I will.
I will.
You can popcorn if you want.
It's not very long. All right. Helping neighbors. If you see someone's ox or sheep wandering away, don't pretend you didn't see it. Take it back to its owner. If you don't know who the owner is, take it to your farm and keep it there until the owner comes looking for it, and then give it to him. The same applies to donkeys, clothing, or anything else you find. Keep it for its owner. If you see someone trying to get an ox or donkey onto its feet when it has slipped beneath its load, don't look the other way. Go and help. Various rules. A woman.
I just read ahead. Go ahead. Sorry.
Okay. This is various rules. A woman must not wear men's clothing. A man must not wear women's clothing. This is abhorrent to the Lord your God. If a bird's nest is lying on the ground, or if you spy one in a tree and there are young ones or eggs in it with the mother sitting in the nest, don't take the mother with the young. Let her go and take only the young. The Lord will bless you for it. Every new house must have a guardrail around the edge of the flat rooftop to prevent anyone from falling off and bring guilt to both the house and its owner. Do not sow other crops in the rows of your vineyard. If you do, both the crops and the grapes shall be confiscated by the priests. Don't plow with an ox and a donkey harnessed together. Don't wear clothing woven from two kinds of thread, for instance, wool and linen. You must sew tassels on the four corners of your cloaks.
Wow, there is a lot in there.
Yeah.
The woman not wearing men's garment and men not wearing women's garments. Today's world, can you imagine? The not mixing of materials with clothing, because there is a study done on the frequency of the different clothings, which has been interesting because you're wearing it on your body, which then can pull frequency out of your body. We'll see what they say about that.
I have a footnote on verse 5. This verse commands men and women not to reverse their sexual roles. It is not a statement about clothing styles. Today, role rejections are common. There are men who want to become women and women who want to become men. It's not the clothing style that offends God, but using the style to act out a different sex role. God had a purpose in making us uniquely male and female.
So not clothing style, but what?
That's what I thought was interesting. Using the style to act out a different sex role. So I guess if a man put on a dress and in his heart wasn't trying to emulate a woman, like, I guess he could wear the dress as a costume, or, well, you know, and men used to wear stuff that looked like dresses, the kilts and things
in
like
Scotland,
that.
they wear kilts, but he's not trying to be a woman. It's just this.
Right.
This
So,
is transgenderism.
yes, it's the motive behind it, the intention, the heart. And the brain, whatever it is. I don't know.
I read that thing about the wool and the linen also. And I thought it was interesting because they say you can't actually wear wool and linen together. You wear either linen or you wear wool because they do something that they cancel each other out. We have to just start weaving our own clothes, huh?
Yeah. Get Cindy to make our outfits for us. Cindy, whenever
Sounds-
you're ready.
Okay. Um, very brief overview, 22, 1 to 26. While loving God was a person's first duty, loving one's neighbor came next. Reference Matthew 22, 37 to 40. In this section, the law of loving one's neighbor is applied to domestic and social relationships. 22, 1 to 4, hide yourself. The Israelite must not hide his eyes from such an obvious loss. It was his duty to pursue and bring back the lost property of his neighbor. 22:5. Anything that pertains to a man, woman's garment. Found only here in the Pentateuch, this statute prohibited a man from wearing any item of feminine clothing or ornamentation, or a woman from wearing any item of masculine clothing or ornamentation. The same word translated, quotes, abomination, was used to describe God's view of homosexuality. Instance specifically outlawed transvestism. The creation order distinctions between male and female were to be maintained without exceptions. 22:6, a bird's nest. Found only here in the Pentateuch, this law showed that God cared for the long-term provisions for his people. By letting the mother bird go, food could be acquired without killing the source of future food. 22:8, a parapet. Found only here in the Pentateuch, this refers to the roof of a home in ancient Israel, which was flat and usually reached by the outside stairs. To prevent injury or death from falling, a fence was to be built around the roof. This, too, expressed love for those who might otherwise be injured or killed. 22:9, different kinds of seeds. The aim of the legislation seems to be to maintain healthy crops by keeping the seeds separate from one another. Reference Leviticus 19:19. 22:10, an ox and a donkey together. According to the dietary laws prescribed earlier, the ox was a clean animal, but the donkey was unclean. Even more compelling was the fact that these two different animals couldn't together plow a straight furrow. Their temperaments, natural instincts, and physical characteristics made it impossible. As with the seed, God is protecting his people's food. And then 22:12, see Numbers 15, 38 to 40 for the purpose of these tassels.
Numbers 15.
Yes, 38 to 40.
Thank you.
That's it through 12.
What did he say about 11?
He didn't.
Okay.
Oh, he said, no, sorry, garment, wool, linen. See Leviticus 19:19.
Well, that was 19 and 19.
My 11 says, two different kinds of thread wear unevenly and wash differently. Combining them reduce the life of the garment. And then it goes on to say, don't think of God's laws as arbitrary restrictions. Look for the reasons behind the laws. They are made not just to teach or restrict, but also to protect and help us.
Leviticus 19:19 does cover several of those things. It says, "You shall keep my statutes. You shall not let your cattle breed with a different kind. You shall not sow your field with two kinds of seed, nor shall you wear a garment of cloth made of two kinds of material." We do that all the time now. Whenever
I
you-
have
Go ahead.
never ever heard about or thought about the frequency of a garment and its material again and how that interacts with our
Body.
nervous system. That's interesting.
I mean, I don't know enough about it. I just know I've read a little bit on it.
Never thought about that.
They do recommend like wearing like 100% cotton, but I do like a stretchy material. Although if we wore like the clothing like they did back then, where they just were dresses that hung, we wouldn't need stretchy material because it would just
Right.
breathe all the time.
Mm-hmm.
Whenever you're ready, Kathy.
Okay, see if I can follow him here. He jumps around again. Loving one's neighbors. These regulations are specific applications of Leviticus 19:18. You shall not take vengeance nor bear any grudge against the children of your people, but you shall love your neighbor as yourself. I am the Lord. The neighbor is a brother, which is even a greater motive for helping him, and God is Lord of both, which is the highest motive of all. In fact, the Jews were to extend the same concern even to their enemies, animals. Both Jesus and Paul admonish us to love our enemies and to manifest this love in practical ways. References to Matthew and Romans.
What was that, Matthews?
5:43 to 48.
Is that the same as yours, Cindy?
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, verses 1 to 3, lost property. There were few fences and walls on Jewish farmland, so it'd be easy for livestock to wander away. If you found such an animal, you were to return it to the rightful owner. If the owner lived too far away, you were to board the animal until the owner came to get it. Farm animals were both expensive and essential. Neither the farm family nor the nation could survive without them. But Moses didn't limit the law to restoring strayed animals. He said that anything a Jewish person found was to be guarded and returned to the owner. Neighbor wasn't only someone who lived adjacent to you, he was anybody in need whom you could help. In his parable of the Good Samaritan in Luke, Jesus followed this definition of neighbor. However, God is concerned for the animal as well as for the owner, and we should be too. The Lord is concerned that people find and restore lost animals, but he is also greatly concerned that we find the lost sinners who have strayed away. References to Luke and James. Certainly, a human being made in the image of God is of more value than a beast. A reference to Matthew. Verse 4, emergencies. A heavily laden donkey wouldn't be easy to lift, but that's what neighbors and brothers are for. For the animal's sake and their sake, the men would get together and turn this emergency into an opportunity to practice brotherly love. Emergencies don't make people, they show what people are made of. When a terrible storm destroyed thousands of trees in our town, some people took advantage of the situation and used their chainsaws to collect exorbitant fees from helpless people. Love of money won over love for their neighbors. But others, including many teenagers, went from place to place donating their services to help those who couldn't help themselves. Verses 6 to 7, tenderness. Concern for fallen animals leads to concern for defenseless birds. It would be easy for the man to wipe out the nest and have wild birds and eggs for dinner, but God prohibited such wanton activity. If the man took the mother bird, the young would die from lack of food and care, so he was allowed to take the young and the eggs. The female bird could have another brood, and this would help to preserve the species. As you read the Mosaic Law, you can't help but be touched by the Lord's concern for the natural resources he put on the earth, not only birds, but also trees. And there's a reference for chapter 20, verses 19 to 20 for the trees. Donkeys, chapter 22, verse 4, and hungry oxen, chapter 25, verse 4. God preserves both man and beast, and there's a reference to Psalms, and he expects his people to assist him in that important work. God provides food for mankind, but the greed of a few can destroy the supply for the many. The Lord promised that it would go well with the nation if they showed concern for the helpless creatures. And there are other references in Deuteronomy for that. Safety, verse 8. The flat roof of a house in Israel was living space for the family, especially during the hot season when they slept on the roof where it was cooler. The owner of the house had to build a low wall or a railing around the roof to protect people from falling. It wasn't enough to post a sign and warn people of danger. He had to put up a barrier to help protect the people. We commonly think of home as a haven from the assaults of the world, but safety specialists tell us that the home can be a scene of many accidents, injuries, and even deaths. Then it jumps back to verse 5 for clothing. The familiar and now accepted word unisex first appeared in print in Life magazine in an article describing unisex clothing as good fashion as well as good fun. In this verse, God calls it an abomination. However, people who agree with Moses don't always agree with each other on how this law should be applied in the church. Since Christians aren't under the old covenant, some believers disregard the law completely, while others use it to tell the women in their churches how they should dress both at home and in public. We can't ignore God's revelation in the Old Testament because Jesus and the apostles used the Old Testament in their discussions of spiritual concerns. Even if this law about clothing doesn't apply to the church in the same way it applied to Israel, there are spiritual principles behind it that are important to us, and there's a reference to 2 Timothy. To begin with, this law doesn't focus on only on clothing. It literally says, "There shall not be man's things upon a woman, and the man shall not put on woman's clothes."
Where was that?
Well, 2 Timothy 3:16 to 17 is where it says it's talking about it says clothing doesn't apply to the church in the same way it applied to Israel. There are spiritual principles behind it that are important to us. And it says 2 Timothy 3:16 to 17. There where it says there shall not be a man's things upon a woman, and a woman's shall not, and a man shall, there shall not be man's things upon a woman, and a man shall not put on woman's clothes. It doesn't give a reference for that. So I'm assuming it's just talking about verse 5 here. The phrase man things could refer to anything that was commonly associated with men in the culture, including clothing, tools, and weapons. If we apply this law strictly to believers today, then we have to determine in every culture and in every circumstance what things are feminine and what things are masculine, and that might not be easy to do. Semitic men wore earrings and other gold jewelry, a practice frowned upon by some churches today. That this verse is a prohibition of transvesticism is clear, but could a man in Western culture use a woman's umbrella or wear her raincoat? Moses was reminding the people that there is distinction between the sexes established by God from the very beginning, and that God wants us to maintain this distinction. So God created man in his own image, and in the image of God created he him, male and female created he them. Genesis 1:27. By divine wisdom, man and woman were made for each other, but were made to be different from each other. Many nations in the ancient world approved and practiced homosexuality even in their religion, but God prohibited it in Israel and made it a capital crime. And there's reference to Leviticus. The maintaining and honoring of sexual distinctions neither demeans the woman nor exalts the man. Both were created by God in his image, and both shared in the creation blessing and mandate. Reference to Genesis. To blur their distinctiveness so that men are no longer distinguishable from women is to bring confusion to God's order for his world. And there's references to 1 Corinthians and 1 Timothy. If a man, hang on. Okay. If men and women in Israel had been allowed to cross-dress, it would have made it easier for them to sin. All the adulterer had to do was put on women's clothing, and nobody would know who was visiting the neighbor's house. In today's society, disguises are no longer needed. In fact, sexual sins are standard fare in media entertainment, and people don't seem to be ashamed of what they see or do. Furthermore, cross-dressing would mean imitating the pagan nations that used such practices in their religious rituals. Be not conformed to this world, Romans 12:2, doesn't mean that Christians shouldn't look like they came from another world or out of time warp. Dedicated Christians will not only look and act like Christians, but they will also look and act like men and women. This also applies to children and young people. Fashions change and cultures differ, but Christian girls and women should always dress modestly. Reference to 1 Timothy. In garments suited to the occasion, and so should men and boys.
What's 1 Timothy?
1 Timothy 2:9.
Thank you.
The principle behind the law is that of separation from the world and recognition of God's order for men and women. It's a principle that helps us honor God and avoid confusion and sin. To say that we have to obey the letter of this law today is to miss the point. Does this also mean we can't wear garments with mixed fibers? Or that we must sew tassels on our clothing? Perhaps the prohibition about mixed fabrics is further reminder of Israel's responsibility to be separated from other nations that practice these things, perhaps as a part of a religious system. Farming, verses 9 and 10. By not yoking different kinds of animals together, the Jews were again recognizing God's order in nature. There was also the matter of separation, for the ox was a clean animal and the ass an unclean animal. From a practical point of view, the animals have different temperaments, and their being yoked together could only create problems. Keeping the various seeds separated when sowing the fields was also recognition of the principle of separation. It's possible that the pagan nations mingled their seed as part of their fertility rites in connection with their gods. Whether they were weaving garments, plowing with the farm animals, or sowing their seed, the Jewish people were to remember that they were God's people and therefore a separated people. This was the Old Covenant version of 1 Corinthians 10:31. Therefore, whether you eat or drink or whatever you do, do all to the glory of God. How far did we go? 12.
12.
You know,
I think
we were
that
talking.
covers.
I'm sorry. We were talking about not dressing as men and women, and I went to Lancaster this past weekend, And of course they have all the Amish. And I don't know, popped in my brain that the men, once they get married, they have to grow that kind of beard without the mustache. And I'm like going, in our culture, anyone can say they're not married. You couldn't tell, but with an Amish man, if he suddenly comes home clean shaven, his wife's gonna go, I don't know. That popped into my head when I was up there.
Yeah. Not so easy to be devious.
Mhm.
Were you done, Kathy?
Yeah, I think that covered it all.
So Tony, I just kind of quick read most of it, the same thing, but there were a couple of things here that were different. I'll just read them. In verse 5, it says, in many places, homosexuality and transgenderism are aggressively promoted by the government and school systems. Whenever a nation's laws no longer reflect the standards of God, that nation is in rebellion against him and will inevitably bear the consequences. When that happens, the people of God should promote his kingdom agenda through biblically based kingdom political involvement and sincere love for others. This is to be done not by violent revolution from the top down, or not by the government top down, but by social transformation based on spiritual principles that work from the bottom up. What God wants from his people is not revolution, but transformation. And then 9 through 11. The common theme in this verse is the mixing of unlike things. Teaching the Israelites to recognize distinctions would help them see the importance of being holy and distinct in a sinful world. Paul uses a similar idea to do not plow with an ox and a donkey together. And when he warns believers not to enter into partnership with unbelievers, do not become partners with those who do not believe, 2 Corinthians 6. The verb Paul uses can be literally rendered unequally yoked, which is exactly what God prohibited the Israelites from doing, unequally yoking an ox and a donkey together. Though believers must live in this fallen world, God wants us to live lives that are holy and separate from the wickedness around us. And then verse 12, I thought this was interesting. The tassels mentioned here served as visual reminders to obey God's law. You know what else the beard would do? If you were a woman having an affair with a married man, every time you kissed him, you would be reminded, every time you looked at him, you would be reminded that he was married. You know what I mean? Like the ring on the finger, that's something they can take off or hide. But the beard would be right in your face all the time. I think we should make our husbands all wear beards.
Yep. Well, in my case.
It wouldn't mean the same as in our culture, it doesn't matter, but you know what I mean? Like that would be like, you can't hide that.
It would have to go across the culture though to mean anything.
Yeah, that's what yeah.
Basically, all this goes back to just being separated from the other, the cults and the other religions.
Yeah, and I don't think it's wrong for a woman to wear pants, or, you know what I mean? But I think it comes back to are you wearing pants because you're trying to look like a man or pretend to be a man? I think it is all about the sexual orientation or role. Because I think women can wear pants and be beautiful. I can't say that I've ever seen a man in a dress that I thought was beautiful, handsome, but.
Well, and if it comes to wearing them as a modesty thing, that can be more modest sometimes than some dresses that you see, you're wearing.
Well, I think that too comes back to like our kids and teaching our like our girls and our boys. And it's like, we should say to girls, well, you need to cover up because you're being a temptation. How about we just say modesty is humbleness?
Mm-hmm.
If you want them to see God and not your breasts, then don't show your breasts, because they're not going to see anything but that. It's it's a modesty and humbleness issue.
When we went to Alyssa's graduation last weekend, it was crazy, wasn't it, Cindy? You would not believe what we saw. Half their boobs were hanging out, and poor little Jagger, the little two girls walked right up the bleacher beside him, and he sat with his head down and his eyes down. He didn't even take a peek.
Good for him.
That's what I said.
But as a parent, like when my daughter went to the prom, like I would never have left her. It was always astounding to me, like her one little girlfriend, you almost could see her butt cheeks. Her dress was so short for the prom.
Well, Cindy and I said to each other, did these people not look in the mirror before they left the house? It was crazy.
Why would you as a parent want to promote your child as a sexual being?
Mm.
Like there are kids in elementary school that are coming in wearing high heels and fake nails in elementary school and makeup. Why? There's no need for your child to wear makeup in elementary school. Well, or ever. But I mean, I don't know. Maybe I'm just a weird parent that way, but like I told Blake, you don't need you can use chapstick when you're 10. Like you're not, I don't know. And she was always well endowed. So I always would make her wear like stuff that came this way because anything that has any cleavage, if you have breasts, you're going to be showing it. I just don't understand why parents don't like realize that when you allow your kids to dress like that, you are literally promoting them as a sexual being to others.
I guess what surprises me sometimes is about that is the parents that allow that I would have never thought would allow that.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't, yeah, maybe they're just not realizing. I don't know. I mean, I don't know.
Yeah, I was so happy when I was in about 7th grade. I had a dress that I had a growth spurt and it got short. And that's right when like mini skirts were. And I'm like, man, this is so cool. I was dressed to go to school that day and dad happened to be home that morning. Well, I didn't get to wear that dress to school, let me tell you.
Because your dad recognized. Yeah.
That's right. Dad was like, you get upstairs and get that off.
Any other thoughts? I think we'll have to stop there for today. I'm not here tomorrow, so we'll pick back up on Wednesday on verse 13. All right, ladies, have a great day.
Bye.
Susan, you're muted.